Okay, Madam Chair, go ahead.
Thank you, Brittany. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your flexibility in changing dates a couple of times. We really appreciate that. And here's John, so excellent timing. I'll call the meeting to order. It's 10:02. And good morning, John. Welcome.
Good morning, everybody.
If I can, I'll begin with our land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge with respect the history, spirituality, and culture of the Anishinaabeg, the people of the three fires known as Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi Nation, who have inhabited this land from time immemorial. And further give thanks to the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash, now known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land. We also recognize the Métis and Inuit, whose ancestors shared this land and these waters. May we all, as treaty people, live with respect on this land and live in peace and friendship with all its diverse peoples. Okay, so you have your agenda before you. The recommendation is that the agenda be approved as presented. Do we have a mover for that recommendation? And then we can discuss any potential changes. Thank you, Danuta. And a seconder? Bob, thank you. Any additions, changes to the agenda that anyone would like to bring forward? Anne?
Yes, I've got a couple. First, I would like to add just a little bit of a discussion about the use of the team chat so that everybody can get on board with it, because I'm not sure that people are using it or going in to look at it and that notices are being received and all of that kind of thing. And I know it's a good tool, and thank you, Brittany, for setting it up, but I think we need to make sure that all of us actually know how to use it. The other thing, I want to first thank Brittany and Cynthia because I really sense as I looked at the agenda package today and for our last meeting, certainly a change in kind of the amount of sharing of information that we're getting. There actually is things that we're being told, and I really, really appreciate that. And thank you to the two of you, because I suspect the two of you are the drivers of that. But I wonder whether, because it feels like we're at a starting point, or a new starting point, and I wonder whether it would be worth having a little bit of a frank discussion about how our community committee members can be used as an asset to support the work of the staff. There's a lot of skills around the table as well as behind this committee, whether it's scientific knowledge, community knowledge, process knowledge. There's a lot here. And I feel like to date, we've not really used that effectively. So if we could have a really frank discussion about what that can look like. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that as community members, we're not always 100% clear about how we're supposed to stay in our lane. And I acknowledge that, and that's why I think having this discussion would be important, so that we know what we're allowed to do, we know how we can be supportive, and we don't kind of mess things up. So I think that warrants an agenda item on a standalone.
Okay.
Okay, and then the other thing, I think when I look at the work plan that's been attached to the agenda package, we did have some questions about what have we learned to date from the process and what information's been accumulated and things like that. I have a feeling that that can be pulled out as we discuss the work plan that's been attached.
So Anne will add the use of the team chat to new business under number 11. And are you suggesting this, your second item, how the committee members' skills can be used to support the work? go in with item 10.1 then when we talk about our action plan, or do you want that to be a standalone discussion as well under new business?
Warrant being a I will accept input from anybody else, but I think it would warrant a standalone prior to moving into the work plan. Because I think the work plan may generate kind of thoughts and things like that. And if we've already had that discussion, then I think it'll smooth out the discussion about the work plan.
Okay, so that would be under unfinished business then, before we have the discussion under 10.1. Does that make sense to you, Brittany and Cynthia?
Sure.
Okay. All right. With those two changes to the agenda, then are we still can the mover and seconder remain? Are there any issues with that for you folks? No. All in favor of these additions to the agenda? And that carries. Thank you. All right. Moving on to the minutes of the previous meeting of April 21st, recommendation that the minutes of that Climate Action Committee meeting be adopted. Do we have someone to move that? Thank you, Danuta, and a seconder. Anne, thank you. Any comments or changes to be made to those minutes? No? Okay, all in favor of adopting those minutes? Thank you, and that carries as well. Declaring pecuniary interest, please do so as you see fit or at this time if you need to. We have no delegations. There's one item under correspondence 7.1 that I added. That's just my summary notes from the MCIP Climate Summit that I attended. There's nothing earth-shattering that's new, but there are always some interesting case studies to review from other places, and in particular, one of them highlighted has some natural asset-based solutions and a focus on some coastal or shoreline areas. So that may be of interest. Okay, staff reports. I see that there's nothing there. Number 9, I don't imagine there's been any questions forwarded, Brittany? No? Okay. All right, moving along then to unfinished business, number 10, and here's where we'll talk about our roles as committee members, perhaps, Anne, and how our members might be used to support the work being done already. And I think that's a kind offer. I'm going to say we don't often see committee members wanting to roll their sleeves up like that, especially an advisory committee, but I imagine staff would appreciate knowing what skills are available and what roles you think folks might be able to have, and also what their time commitment might be. I know that it's particularly helpful right now as we've had some staffing changes as well. So yeah, let's just open it up. I see Danuta, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Thank you. The Northwest Peninsula, which recently have adopted their climate action plan, in that case, the advisory committee was quite actively involved in doing the emissions audit and so on. They did some of the work. So, and that's the only place I know of where, offhand, I'm not sure about Huron-Kinloss, where the advisory committee was very hands-on. And so there's a precedent for that.
Thank you, Danuta. And I do recall us talking about this very, very early on in the process, that there may be some folks on the committee who have those kinds of skills that they might be able to offer. We do have our consultant doing an emissions audit, but the focus is on corporate. Thank you. It's the corporate piece. So just checking in with staff, Cynthia, is that, I know at one point we had talked about the emissions, community emissions inventory perhaps also shifting over to the consultants, but I may not be accurate in that statement.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair Coburn. And yeah, this is a really good discussion, and for me, a very interesting discussion. You know, in my time here, as you've alluded to, there's been sort of ebbs and flows and some changes in this area. So yes, my understanding and in chatting with the consultants is they have been focusing on the corporate emissions work. I'm not sure that we need them to do the community emissions information. I think there is information that we can get from the county. I think there's information that we can get from some other sources. And it is one area that I do think, so if I back up the bus a little bit, I thank Anne and the committee for acknowledging that Brittany and I have sort of taken this ball and we're running with it. And it is on top of everything else that we're doing. You know, we're in the process of replacing our director of operations. We're likely not going to replace our contract employee who is only going to be here for another year. I think we have to step back and take a look at what that kind of resource is needed. So thank you. I do think the emissions area is something that we can get some committee members a little bit more involved with. And whether it be even assisting us as we go through the corporate side of the equation, but particularly the community side of the equation. So I think Brittany and I would welcome one or two people working with us through that process and gathering that information. That was pretty long-winded. I apologize for that.
Well, it couldn't have been too long-winded because I see Brittany didn't mute you partway through, so you're good. That would be bold, wouldn't it, for her to do that?
Yeah, she's got other ways of muting me.
Okay, no, that's good. That recap with the consultant is good to know. Anne.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Cynthia. And also thank you for clarifying what's happening with the client coordinator's role, because that was actually a question that I had on my list and forgot to include. So,
yeah, sorry, Anne, and in terms of that role, I mean, we really only had council approval for a certain time frame. And I'm not, I guess, without going back to council and saying we need more, I'm not sure that we're going to attract, I'm not sure spending the time trying to attract somebody to that position is really where we need to focus right now, particularly when we've got community members who are willing to step up.
Right. So what I wonder about then in terms of, so you kind of identified a specific task, whether we could handle that the way Brittany has suggested we handle the GB Goes Green, where we've got this little subcommittee that's working with Brittany, kind of doing that, and whether the admissions one could be handled in the same way.
I think similar, for sure.
Yeah. Right. And so I'm also then understanding that we have not received the portion of Georgian Bluff's emissions inventory that Grey County did as part of their climate action plan. I know that was talked about quite a while ago about Trevor asking for that, but I'm assuming from what you said, we've not received that, or it hasn't been asked for. I don't know which.
I think that's a follow-up item for Brittany and I. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I wasn't sure whether the county would pull that information for us or if they would just make the information available and we would extract what's applicable to Georgian Bluffs.
Can follow
John,
up.
oh, sorry. So we'll leave that as follow-up and over to you, John.
Well, just as a follow-up from Anne, it would really help if we had an update of where we're at with this whole work plan, because we were on a timeline with Trevor and Steve that sort of is just disappeared.
Mhm.
And we have no idea where we're at in terms of that progress. And so as a starting point, it would be really good um, for this committee to have a pretty good idea of where we're at and what the task is ahead. And then as part of that process, try and set a new timeline, a new work plan that
Sure.
we would work towards. Because without goals, I mean, this just doesn't happen.
Fair comment. And I'll be honest with the committee, Brittany and I are still sifting through information that's been left behind. So
That itself might be something we could help with.
perhaps.
I work quite a bit with Linda and the county.
Did you mute John, Brittany?
I think he's frozen.
I think he's frozen, but I know what he was getting at was that he does a lot of work with Linda Swanson and the county around their climate action plan. So there's already a strong connection there that possibly, I don't know, I can't speak for John, but possibly.
I'm back.
Okay.
I think my internet froze. I'm up at my camp. I'm on a
While
satellite,
we were
so
frozen,
it's
John,
not
we
as good
nominated
as
you to
home.
work on that committee for us. So is that something, John, you would be able, are you offering to do then, is to look at, sorry, were you suggesting you might be able to look at the county information and help sift through some of that and extract the Georgian Bluff specific data? Or were you talking more of the work plan?
I was talking more of the work plan, but working with the emissions is certainly an expertise that I could bring to this group, because I'm relatively familiar with the methodology. I mean, I was interacting with Caitlin Roger from ICLEI over my criticisms of some of their estimates. And you'll see if you compare the draft report to the final report, all the numbers change, some a little bit, some quite significantly.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm not the kind of certified expert that Caitlin Roger is in terms of doing those emissions. I don't have that skill or those qualifications, but I'm certainly quite good at looking at numbers. I mean, I already have a pretty good idea based on what our community emissions are based on the average that the Grey County has counted in our most recent
Right.
census population results. So we know the ballpark we're heading towards already. But I think I was referring more to that big picture work plan.
Mm-hmm.
I just knowing where we sit on these various things, because we had a very ambitious agenda when we started out that included corporate and community adaptation and mitigation. And that's, that was where we started. If you go back and look at the notes and records. And right now, I think we're just struggling to get to the corporate mitigation baseline emissions. I think that's all I've ever heard. Now, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe there's much more, but that's what I was sort of referring to, the work plan.
Did you want a chance to respond, Cynthia, before we go on to Anne's comment?
Well, yes, and thank you. It's just, yeah, it's something else twigged for me just in John's comments. So I think we'll talk about getting information from the county, a work plan. But what twigged for me is on particularly the adaptation side, there is other work going on. So for instance, I've initiated conversations with NEC, the county, and the Conservation Authority on a number of items, shoreline being one, how we're dealing, just even our policies and working together, our trail network, that kind of thing. But I think one of the things we need to work with our staff on is what is the tie-in then to some of the work that's going on that might be influenced or be of interest to this group. And so I think that's another thing to build into the work plan, is not just the work of this group, but what else is going on, whether it's outside of this organization or that Georgian Bluffs is part of, that might be of interest or influenced by this group as well. So that was just a twig for me.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, and I think it's important to capture all of that because the work that we're already doing should, you know, account for something and should be documented somewhere. I think this is where things get a little bit confusing for me though when we start talking about work plans, because we have the community that's attached here, the community action planning kind of work plan, and then we have you know, a work plan likely that we have seen presented by our consultant. And then we have this committee's work plan that was started and Luke was kind of the keeper of. And I feel like for me, wouldn't it be nice if we could tie it all together into one master work plan so that it's all in one place? I think that when we started out, and correct me if I'm wrong, but our committee work plan that we started out with was an excellent place to start, but it had a lot of action items that this committee itself wouldn't be doing as an advisory committee. So, I mean, does it make sense to work towards a master plan that has objectives and timelines on it rather than having these all sort of separate pieces? What are your thoughts around that? Anybody? Anne, your hand's up. Was that something different or do you want to comment on this?
I can comment on I think that as well as my other comment. And some of what Cynthia was talking about in terms of other things happening they're happening kind of in the Georgian Bluffs municipality, but not kind of under this committee. And to me, that comes under the umbrella of working from the perspective of a climate lens in all the departments of the municipality. And probably it could also lead to identifying, are there areas that staff could actually welcome or benefit for some training around how to look at their job from a climate perspective, and whether that could come to the committee to look at how to help with that. So that was one point. I want to go back to what John said, because I thought that the consultants were looking at both corporate mitigation and adaptation. And that was my understanding, but because I thought their last presentation had a whole chunk about adaptation, and I don't know why they would do that if they weren't going to look at it for Georgian Bluffs. So I think from a corporate perspective, they're doing both, I think. And I guess the third thing I wanted to comment on was, Kathy, if you think it would be useful, I would volunteer to dust off Luke's plan and take a look at kind of how relevant it is now, and see whether I could plop things into it that I know are happening now, because I know that this plan that was attached to the agenda package has timelines and actions that probably fit into it, as does the corporate plan that's being worked on, has timelines and targets and all of that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't mind taking, if the committee thinks it's useful, I could pull out Luke's work plan, try to get a sense of how relevant is it still, because it's, I think it's like last September that we created that. Is it still relevant? Is it still useful? And could it be melded with what we've got, or do we need to start fresh?
How do folks feel about that? Comments? Anne's made a generous offer, and I'm wanting to jump at it myself. But let's go to Deputy Mayor Carleton.
Thank you. My thought is, and I'm wondering if it would somewhat help any of the public who are following along, if we went back to that plan that Luke sort of got started on, which I think was a really good start. But I think the comment was made that we're not following all of those things through. So if there were a column added that said, this item is being handled by staff, or it's being handled by the consultant, or the committee is doing it, then it's easier to track at a committee level the things we should be focusing on. And I wonder if that would be beneficial to not just us on the committee, but as I say, to any member of the public that's trying to watch and thinking, well, that's there in the plan, but who's doing it?
Yeah. No, I think that would be helpful. Definitely have a responsible person or body column for sure. I wonder if, oh, sorry, Bob, I see your hand is up. Let's go to you next.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, I'm not sure why our climate action coordinator left, Trevor, and I don't know why Steve left either, our operations director, but maybe the planning stuff was, I don't know, it might have been too complicated for them, you know, like maybe it was just too much of a schmozzle for them to sort of, you know, who's on first, who's on second. I know that several municipalities out there across Canada, I'm sure, have been developing, you know, climate action plans and developing documents. And I just, you know, you talk to 100 different people and there's going to be 100 different opinions in terms of how to tackle this. But you'd think that if we could somehow select maybe 3 what we think are decent plans that are out there from different municipalities, and then just kind of suck out the good parts from each one of them and kind of say, okay, this is our first straw dog. This is the first thing that we've got to actually rip apart and comment on. And maybe that would be easier. I'm just thinking, if I was a young guy starting out in my career, I feel badly that Trevor's not with us anymore, because it's not helping him not being here, not finishing up, and we haven't got a whole lot to show for it either, I don't think. But I just think that if I was a young guy starting out with a little bit of mentorship, I probably would have been told to go look at something else and come back with a proposal, and then we'll talk about it and then get things going. And it might have been just a lot easier. I just hope that we didn't scare them off by being too particular about our planning. And you know, there's some talent on the committee, and it's probably scary, you know, to some people that are just starting. And maybe we got on the wrong foot there. I don't know. I'm just guessing, but I don't know. I'm just saying. We don't want to put too much brain power into this. I don't think it's rocket science to do this, but I don't think we want to scare anybody off either.
Right.
Anyways, my 2
No,
cents.
you're right about, Bob, about other municipalities putting their plans forward. I know that North Bruce Peninsula has recently put their climate action plan forward, and they're having some community or public, I don't know if you call them consultations or educational sessions around that. I guess for me, and I hope I'm not, you know, repeating myself, but for me, I feel like we have all these bits and pieces that are yet to be connected into a whole. And I think Anne has offered to do that, or at least take the first step in doing that and looking at what we called the committee work plan. I'm still hesitant to call it our work plan, but rather part of the big climate action plan, really. So yeah, you're right. There are other ones out there to look at. I do, you know, there is a bit of a scientific process to this. I think when we need to look at the data, right, we need to pull out the county data that's applicable to us, and we need to look at the data that the consultants are providing regarding the corporate side of things. And so our action plan should be informed by the data to a certain extent. At the same time, I totally agree with Bob in that, you know, we're not going to have anything likely too unusual for Georgian Bluffs that other municipalities aren't looking at in terms of action items as well. Cynthia, let's get your thoughts on that next.
Yeah, no, and I think the comments are all very good. Yeah, I'm not going to speak for individuals and their intentions. I do think we're not the only municipality who has struggled to get this body of work off the ground. You know, in 2 other municipalities that I've been in, this was a big body of work, and, you know, lots of passion. lots of confusion, and you know, I think without some focus, it can go off in 100 different directions. And so I do think it's important, and I do think we've got the team who can pull it off. Although I do caution that on the staffing side, we are down a couple and hoping to bring more on. I just and the only comment I would make about looking at other people's plans is we have to make sure they're relatable. You know, I think one of the challenges is when people look at, you know, say what Vancouver's doing, or, you know, other municipalities that have very different contexts and very different resourcing levels, it might be, you know, I'm happy to hear North Bruce. It's a little bit more relatable to our context. And I think if we look at the work plan that had been the most recent plan that had been pulled together, I think that was the attempt, was to take a look at the context in Grey County. And there were some proposed areas of focus or sectors that we might want to look at, which were the transportation sector and our natural environment, agriculture, business, and waste. You know, like those were proposed as areas of focus, and they may be starting points for you know, a community climate action plan. So just some thoughts.
Mhm. No, good points. Yep. Danuta?
I just wanted to volunteer to help Anne with the work plan stuff if she wants someone to bounce it off.
Super.
Thanks.
And looks like she's in agreement. Awesome. Thank you, Danuta. Anne?
So I just want to take us back to the start of the topic of this discussion, because I think we have kind of started to shift into talking about the actual work plan and climate action planning. And the start of the discussion was, what role do committee members play in the process? And kind of to be more kind of specific, are we observers and commenters, or would you like us to take on some of the tasks? And if so, how do those tasks get designated? Do we establish some working groups? Like I could see a small group focusing on doing the inventories. I could see a small group focusing on community education, which I think the GB Goes Green is part of. I could see a focus on staff education if we identify a need for that, and kind of how do staff do their jobs looking at a climate lens. I think there's another group that I worry that we are forgetting, and that is our counselors, because I'm really aware that whatever this committee does and whatever the staff does has to be approved by council. And if we don't keep the council on board as we go down this pathway, a lot of work could happen, and they'll say, what are you doing? when you're asking them to vote on it. So, you know, I think that's a chunk of work. I don't know what it looks like, but I think it's an important piece that we have to keep a focus on.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And maybe when you get the work plan dusted off, you and Danuta, and maybe start to meld these plans together a little bit. Maybe there's a time in the not too distant future where the committee does a presentation for council to bring them up to speed on where we're at and what direction we're currently heading. I'd like us to get, my own opinion is that we have a little more coherence in our plan, because council does like to look at, you know, a document that tells us what's been done and what's about to be done, and with some timelines. I think that's always helpful. So yeah, those are fair points, Anne. And I just want to make one comment about, you mentioned about staff being in the loop, and I think that's really important too. I imagine that's another thing that's happening behind the scenes that maybe we just need to bring to the fore in terms of our documentation and adding it to the plan. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment on that, Kathy, because I think there's two ways of keeping the council kind of in the loop. And one is in the loop of the work, but also the other is in the loop of why the work is important. And I remember watching the council when the concept of a tree bylaw was presented. And, you know, everybody on this committee thought it was a wonderful idea, and it's been shelved because of the reaction at council. And so I don't think we can assume that we just do the work and then say, please approve this. I think there needs to be a process that allows the council to kind of learn as we learn. And I don't know what that looks like, but I think if we neglect that, that could bite us in the end.
Right. Yep. Do staff, Brittany or Cynthia, do you have comments about that piece in particular about helping us keep council members informed, not just about the plan, but as Anne says, about the issues as well? Do you think we're doing that? I know Brittany brings, and Cynthia bring forward to council the activities that we're doing, like the green cone and GB Goes Green. Is there more that you feel we could be doing at this point in time for council?
Yeah, and it's a good question. And I think I'm just looking at where we are in this term of council and related to an election. So I think if you're asking Brittany and I, we would probably be turning our minds more to what does the future look like, and what might we be providing council as part of orientation and ongoing. I don't know, Brittany, if you want to jump in as well.
I think I would agree with your comment, Cynthia. I think Councillor Coburn, I think you hit it on the head. I think we've spoke multiple times here about how do we keep council informed? How do we get the committee literally in front of council to provide these updates, to not hear it necessarily from Cynthia or I, but to hear it from the group of you who are kind of the dedicated experts and dedicating your volunteer time to accomplishing the goals for this community. So I think when we have a defined work plan, we can sit down together as a collective and determine what that would look like in the council sphere. And Cynthia, I think you hit it on the head, being how do we incorporate it into orientation and moving forward?
Back to you, Cynthia.
Yeah, so Kathy, I just wanted to make a comment about the tree bylaw. And that was not necessarily shelved because of a reaction from council. We're still working with our counterparts. So myself coming in, I've dealt with a tree bylaw in a much larger urban center. If you have a bylaw, you have to enforce. And we have NEC, county, and others who have forest management plans. They have permitting processes, this sort of thing. So the long story short is it's more about getting that consolidated picture and then presenting to council. There's a realm of things that we could do from a punitive bylaw. Like really, Georgian Bluffs has a very little authority over a lot of our forested area. It's mostly on private properties. So the realm from a punitive bylaw right through to it's about education, awareness, you know, that kind of thing, encouraging proper canopy management. So I just wanted to clarify that it's not work that's lost. It's just work that, you know, and again, looking at our timing right now, it might be a better discussion in the future.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to provide that update to the group. It wasn't that it was just dismissed. It was just making sure we're coming at it from that comprehensive perspective.
I do think, though, if I may, I think there was some misunderstanding about the intent 2 of that tree bylaw, which was a good lesson learned for us because we may have put the cart before the horse and not explained maybe the intent or the value of before we perhaps pushed forward with as Cynthia calls it, a punitive kind of a bylaw. So lesson learned, and we'll move forward from that. Over to you next, John.
Don't forget to unmute. In this conversation, I just wanted to add that we can't lose sight of our community and the importance of our community's input and involvement. Pre-COVID, in developing any action plan, whether it's adaptation or mitigation, the community is involved. And this was done through workshops, and they were run by consultants. And every example I'm aware of, I don't think I could say post-COVID, but in COVID, this has moved much more online. And the City of London ran a wonderful online tool that helped them develop their climate action plan, which is very progressive, with community input. And with that input, they modified their plans so that it was accepted by the community. And I found out yesterday in our meeting with Owen Sound that they are about to implement a software program. And I must admit, I'm going to have to get back to Michelle and find out more about it because I'm quite interested in it. But this will be an online tool that we'll run from the Owen Sound Climate Action page that will allow community input. And it's very extensive, very dynamic. It's not as simple as a survey. So it's something I would really need to find out more about. But just as part of this conversation, let's not over focus on council and forget about community. And that was my comment.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. John, we'll look forward to hearing more information on that particular tool perhaps at a future meeting then, because that does sound good. I sometimes do get frustrated with surveys and sometimes the way they're written, it doesn't give us the information necessarily that we need. So yeah, and more interactive tool might be really helpful. Thank you for that information. Yeah. At some point, I want to try to summarize what we've talked about here in terms of roles and where we're going forward. But before I do, I'll turn it over to you, Anne.
Well, actually, I was going to try to do that, so I could just pass it back to you, Kathy, or give a start, because I feel like we've kind of done this. I get a sense that there is interest in involving committee members in some of the more kind of hands-on work when it's identified. And so staff can either request or we can offer. Is that how that will work? Some of the areas are looking at the plan, which Danuta and I have volunteered to do. Possibly the emissions inventory and data collection, and then possibly, and I labeled it, actually there's two, I labeled it as education, and that would have community, staff, and council. And then the third one is community, or the fourth one is community engagement. I think that those are 4 areas that I think we have folks that would be, I'm going to speak for them this time, willing and able to help in those 4 areas. So, I think if there's agreement around this group on that, I think that's a good place to begin from.
I agree. And so we're kind of looking at like a subcommittee kind of format. And you've listed all 4 of those nicely. I think some of them will happen sooner rather than later, perhaps. Like the work plan that you and Danuta is likely going to happen fairly soon, hopefully. And I think I heard John say that he'd be willing to help out with the emissions data, the inventory data. Thank you, John. It's important to use your skill set, I think, especially when it's being offered so generously. And the community engagement piece, if I'm not mistaken, I think that will be happening as we go along. Brittany's excellent at, keeping this kind of in the public eye. But if there are folks who want to step up to help out with that, that might be a little bit down the road. So, and what was the fourth one? I've forgotten. Community engagement, the plan, the inventory and emissions.
Well, the other one was education, and I kind of separated education out from engagement. I see them as two different things.
They're different, but they kind of go hand in hand. I think you could probably put awareness and education together, but understanding that they're two different things, and it's also two different things when we, or three different things when we talk about staff, education awareness for staff, for council, and for the general public. Yeah. Over to you, Brittany.
Just a brief comment. I just wanted to pass along my thanks specifically to Anne while we're speaking about the kind of community engagement piece / the education piece. She's been really essential in communicating the GB Goes Green while we're in the early stages, including bringing the signs to every opportunity that you see fit, and really ensuring that we're doing our best to get that message throughout the community. So I just wanted to offer my thanks while we were talking about it.
Thank you, Brittany, and thank you, Anne. That's appreciated very much. Yeah. Okay, Cynthia.
Yeah, just a couple points. So yeah, the four, I had the same four written down. I wonder if awareness building might be a better tag than education. And sometimes people take a little umbrage at being educated as opposed to awareness building, just a thought. And I do think around that awareness building, the GB Goes Green, we had talked previously about the green talks, like vignettes and things like that. So again, I see the committee members being integral in those. The last thing is I do have the census data information. I have the link, so I can send that to the committee. There's a fantastic map of Georgian Bluffs, and there's the breakdown of all of the profile information for our community if folks wish.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
Thank you. Will you send that out by email, or will that go to the Teams chat forum?
I'll do email for now, just as people are getting used to the Teams chat.
Sounds good. Yes. All right. And Anne, your hand is still up. I don't know if that's from before. It's from before. Okay. So we have identified 4 areas where smaller groups or subcommittees can work together. I guess for folks to let us know if you're interested in any working on any of those. We do have some community members identified as helping out with some of those subcommittees. Can we leave it at that for now? Does that sound like a reasonable plan going forward? Okay, seeing nodding. Cynthia?
Yeah, and just for the group, Brittany and I will follow up on, those identified individuals and get those groups set up.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you to the committee members who are willing to roll the sleeves up and pitch in there for sure. Okay, thanks for bringing that item forward, Anne. I think that was a productive discussion for sure. Okay, I think that takes us now to the community climate action pillars of focus for the community climate action plan. Who am I looking to for bringing this one forward? Is that staff? Brittany, who is?
I can certainly start. So following our meeting last month, I want to say that was in May or I don't recall. We looked through the draft items that are again attached today and had a brief discussion about how we were going to focus our community action plan in relation to that of the Grey County Climate Action Plan. So we simply reattached today to have a detailed discussion of what this committee feels the best pillars to form our plan are, and further the information that should be included with those pillars, including what types of community engagement, etc., so we can start focusing in on our community action pillars to develop and inform our public engagement process. Cynthia, do you have anything to add to that?
I apologize. I was sending the census profile information out. Yeah, no, I think just tagging on to Brittany's comments, you know, we've been reviewing the county climate action plan, and I think we had presented to the group what might be the areas of focus for Georgian Bluffs, just looking at how we plug in to the county's plan as well. So.
Okay, so thank you. That when you talk about the pillars, Brittany, are you talking about the milestones, the 4 milestones as the pillars, or when you talk about the community climate action pillars of focus, what specifically are you referring to in this document?
So I'm speaking most specifically about the identified kind of quote unquote action items. So we built our action items being active transportation, the waste management, the different pillars that I'm calling them literal pillars, the columns that are included in those in that document in front of you. So Cynthia and I consulted the Grey County Climate Action Plan to, I guess, take inspiration for our local plan so we can build in some collaboration with the county's goals as well. So we're simply looking for this committee's feedback in regards to those pillar items and how you feel they fit within Georgian Bluffs, or if they don't, what area might be a better focus for us to pay attention to.
Okay. So as you said, those are active transportation, the natural environment, preserving the natural environment, agriculture, business practices, and waste management and diversion. So those are the pillars that I believe we're referring to.
Councillor Coburn, I apologize if I may just interrupt for 1 minute. I do recognize that the committee provided some feedback at the last meeting regarding kind of looking at the active transportation and defining it more specifically. So those comments are still noted. They are included in the minutes of the last meeting. We're simply looking for us to kind of hammer down these pillars. And if it's the committee's wish to continue with these pillars with the discussion that we had last time, then we can continue moving forward with the climate action plan.
Okay, comments, Danuta. You're just still on mute, Danuta, sorry.
I think Anne's hand was up before mine. Do you want me to go ahead, Anne, or not?
Sure, you go ahead and then
Okay.
I'll follow.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if we were going to come up with the same things, but I looked at the county plan as well, and I looked at the North Bruce Peninsula plan, and everyone's got these 5 action themes. Actually, the county has 8, although I couldn't find number 6. And I think transportation needs to be an inclusive title, because I don't think we can rule out looking at vehicle emissions in the need to lower emissions. So active transportation comes under the umbrella of transportation. In that case, if you choose to do that, and that would cover zero emission vehicles. This is talking about community, especially, but I guess it's global, active, and also public transit, which in Georgian Bluffs is a big issue, and perhaps not very practical for people, all the things they've tried, but it's still a 3 action pillar in that sense. And I don't get the businesses. The businesses to me don't define what you're looking for because they involve buildings, they involve transportation, they involve waste, they involve. So I'm wondering if what we need to look at is buildings because that also takes into account private residences. And that
Right.
again is energy use and emission source.
So more
Certainly
like the-
waste.
Sorry, more
the
like the built environment, and you're right, this
built
sort of
environment
excludes
and
residential and
pretty much a lot like what the county has. They have buildings and development. They've made buildings and development together. To me, development involves buildings, transportation, waste, and then agriculture, of course, big deal here. And then protecting the environment. Bruce County, the North Bruce Peninsula has Protect the Peninsula in their plan as that component of it. And Grey County has nature-based solutions and agriculture. They've somehow put them together, which is interesting. But I think protecting the environment is a really important pillar as well. And under that falls your shorelines, your natural infrastructure. All these things get mentioned underneath that pillar. So that would be 5 that I sort of came up with is transportation, buildings, waste, agriculture, and protecting the environment as touching all those areas. Anyway, that's what I wanted to suggest.
Yeah, no, those are fair comments. So I think just tweaking the titles of those pillars. So I think we should leave active off transportation. And in my world of public health, we call active transportation anything that requires your body to be active, walking, hiking, cycling. But what I have found in my municipal work as a counselor is that people define active transportation in that realm in exactly the opposite way. They're talking about ATVs and, dirt bikes, and that's what they call active transportation. So it's, let's just call it transportation, and we can be specific about what the interventions and goals should be. So instead of preserving the natural environment, Danuta, I think you used the word protecting, and I like that better. I think that's maybe a little more overarching, perhaps. Agriculture is as that, waste management and diversion is as that, and business practices, you're suggesting we call that buildings and development.
Just because I think transportation would cover those types of emissions that are come from businesses. And if you talk about buildings, you also can bring in private dwellings.
Exactly.
Which are a significant source of emissions as well in home heating.
Okay, thank you. I like those suggestions. That makes sense. Now, was it, oh gosh, I've lost track of the order. Anne, were you next then? And then we'll go to John and then Sue.
I think I was next, and I concur with Danuta's comments. I think taking active off and just focusing on transportation so you can go in a number of directions. I think having buildings is really important because we know that home energy use, building energy use is a big one. And putting in buildings instead of businesses would cover that for both businesses and private use. I do wonder about the enhancing or preserving the natural or protecting the natural environment, whether there needs to be enhancing as well, because preserving just looks at keeping what we got, whereas I think there's room for actually enhancing that natural environment.
Yeah.
Those are my comments.
No, that's a good point. Yep. Even planting more trees is enhancing, right? So that's, yeah. I just thought of something too when we talked about buildings. So we're talking about residential and business, but it also refers to our municipal buildings. And I was reading somewhere that even things, so we talked about staff being on board as well, even things like flooding the ice in an arena less frequently has an important impact. Turning lights off in a community center when they're not being used. So the buildings then that title can apply to our municipal facilities as well. Okay, I think you were next, John.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a comment on the pillars, but first I have a question. At our network meeting on Monday, Linda Swanston from the county said that now that the plan is out, that she's been invited by a number of municipalities to give a presentation. And my question is, have we invited her to present to council? Are we on that list? Okay, good. My comment was that a few years ago, as we were starting down this path, I wrote a document called Planning Through the Lens of Climate, or Climate Lens. And in that document, I covered many topics. And at the end of it, I summarized the 6 areas that were common themes in all of the many climate action plans that I had reviewed. And just to list them, so there's a word and then there's like a short paragraph of description in this document. But these common themes were infrastructure, transportation, natural environments, building partnerships, food and water security, and lastly, and maybe most importantly, education and engagement. So that document has been widely circulated. I know it was referenced early on in the Grey County when they were starting to develop their climate action plan. Would it be useful to circulate that to this committee again? Because I think it is a really good reference point. And I would just emphasize, in putting this together, I reviewed an awful lot of climate action plans. And so this is simply a document trying to represent what had been done and what planning through a climate lens constituted. So why don't it's a PDF, it's short, it's only 6 pages. I'll send it to Brittany and she could distribute it. Would that be the right process?
That would be great. I wonder too, when Brittany has her eyes on it, if it might be something she could include in our resource section of our web pages too, if that's something that would help the public. When you say planning, when you, John, I hear planning from Jen Burnett's perspective. Is that the kind of planning? No, that's a different kind of planning.
Well, it's all kind of planning. So when you build a new building, if you build a zero carbon building, as Essex Wellington did with their new fire department, they add 15% to the building costs, of a multi-million-dollar building, and they recoup those costs in something like 6 to 8 years. Mm-hmm. And so that's planning through a climate lens. Mm-hmm. If you want money from Infrastructure Canada, you have to have planned through a climate lens in order to access that money, and that begins with a verifiable, certified baseline GHG emissions. When you're doing your asset management, one of the first workshops we ran with Niagara Adapt was we brought in consultants to the 7 municipalities we were working with and teach them how to asset management plan through the lens of climate. Mm-hmm. So it's if you're doing it, it ends up being everything, and this is where education of staff becomes huge, but also engagement of the public. And so that's why education and engagement was number 6, and that's an important pillar of many of these climate action plans that I've reviewed. And they were all in Ontario, and they included municipalities in the GTA, but also small municipalities like Midland and Huron-Kinloss that were available to me at the time. So that's sort of if you read the document, it also talks about I forgot the term of it, but the triple bottom line approach that gets built into climate action planning. When I talked to the Grey Sabo Conservation Authority back in January, I ended up referencing this wonderful study that Tim Lanthier and others had done at the Conservation Authority, bringing a market value to basically non-market assets, which are constituted in. Those are all part of climate action planning. So why don't I'll send the document to Brittany, and of course, glad to talk about this anytime you want. But that's sort of the concept.
Thank you. No, I think that's helpful. And if it's a document that might help some of our staff members as well, I don't know if they have time to read anything extra these days, but certainly we want our staff to be kept informed of all of these things as well. Thank you, John. And Member Sue, go ahead.
Thank you. what I want to comment on is in response to what Janine had commented about the county's plan. When that was presented to county council, we were given it as 11 pillars, so to speak, 7 being community, 4 being corporate. And we had noted at that time that number 6 was missing. So I will get back to Linda and point that out, that we need a revision in that plan. She also needs to spell my last name right too. So I'll add that too. But I'll
Okay.
make sure that change takes place on that plan. Thanks,
Thank
Janine.
you. Those are fair points. So when we say staff that we've invited Linda to come and speak, is that to our council? Hopefully that's to our council as well. Like, or were you just meaning this particular committee? Brittany?
Thank you. I had asked for both. At this time, I think we've landed on a date for climate action. We haven't landed on a solid date for council, but I had asked for both.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Excellent. Was there anything more, Sue, or can we move on to Anne? Okay, Anne?
Yeah, I like what John was saying about the education, awareness raising, and engagement. And I almost see that as an umbrella for these pillars, because each one of the pillars will require that education, awareness raising, and engagement. So it's like it's an umbrella, and then the other pillars come under that because you have to do it for all of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I'm sure once we read that document, John, we'll have a better sense of those different areas as well. Okay. So Brittany, does that give, Brittany and Cynthia, does that give you enough in terms of the pillars of focus, enough to take that away and do what we need to do?
Kathy, I am intrigued with John's document though. So it gives us enough to go away, but I think we may be back revisiting as well. So.
Sounds good. Yep. So items for review and consideration, that's the Grey County and our action plan. Were there any other comments that folks wanted to make on our community action plan, the draft that was included in the package? If not, I think we're good to move on to new business. And I'll turn, well, I think Anne gave us a good introduction. So this is the use of the team chat. I do find that to be useful rather than emails because my inbox gets pretty full. And I don't like to think that I might be missing something by email. The downside to the Teams chat for me is remembering to go and check it. So, Anne, did you have any particular, was it a how to use that, or how we're intending to use that function? Is that what you were wanting to discuss?
Well, I figured out the how to, and I think I have figured out the setting up that I'm supposed to get notices if something goes in there. But what I discovered is I discovered this because I put kind of a fairly long question in there, and actually we covered a good part of that question in the agenda because I added it on, but I didn't get any response. So it left me thinking that people weren't looking at it. People were not getting notices that anything was in there to look at. So I either that or they thought my question wasn't worth responding to. I don't know. I suspect it's that people weren't using it yet. And if that's the case, then I think we need to talk a little bit about how to get people on board, how to set up the getting notice if something goes in there, because I know I'm not going to remember to kind of routinely go in and look for the team chat and see if there's anything there. If I get a notice that there's something there, I will go. So, yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna confess I'm a little confused. Do we want to talk about, Anne, how to get people to turn on notifications, or?
Can I just start by asking, has everybody kind of gone into that team communication system?
Some,
So
it looks
I
like
see
50,
John,
50.
no, I see Bob, no. Danuta, have you been in it?
Excuse me. Yes, I have, Anne, but I can't find my way back into it without using the link that Brittany sent. So I've downloaded the Windows app, but it just takes me to a profile page of Microsoft, and there's no way I can find the Teams chat through that. So I'm confused as to if I'd always have to use that link that Brittany sent, or if there's a way that I can just access it directly.
Yes, I'm going to turn it over to Brittany, and she's likely going to explain that. Thanks, Brittany.
So I can give some just brief comments here. I think if we need an in-depth how-to, then it's something that I'll need to put together and circulate to the team, because I have found when someone's dictating to me how to do something, it doesn't make any sense until I try to do it myself. So I can do my best to try and give an overview here today, but I think it's likely something I'll have to create a more detailed how-to document for. Danuta, to answer your question briefly, it's set up as a team profile, so you have the ability to use it as like a project management tool or to add announcements, like different little things that you can use the entirety of the team portfolio to complete. So that's something that I'll get into more detail with, but along the left-hand side, the toolbar on the app is the team function, and when you select it, you'll note that there's a climate action portfolio built into your teams now. So it is definitely a useful tool that I think this committee can make a lot of use out of. In regards to the use, I just wanted to make a couple of comments from the staff side. I think at least the intention I believed when setting it up was it's simply just an easier way for this group, being our volunteer citizens, to communicate more effectively with one another, not so much a formal tool to communicate with staff, because Cynthia and I will have to be honest, we're treating it as something that you are using to communicate with each other rather than something to communicate with us. If we decide that it's something that you want to use to communicate with us, then we just have to set that expectation now.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that our community members have an effective way of communicating with each other already through email. I'm going to let other people kind of respond to that, but that's my perception that we do a pretty good job of that now. So I'm not sure we need the team to do that.
You mean the wider community? The wider climate action
or
community.
with each other, and yeah, like if it's just community members, I'm not sure we need that tool.
Okay. Other thoughts? Danuta?
Well, I think as a committee, I would include Kathy and Sue in our ability to have discussion through that site.
Yeah, to clarify, when I say this group, I mean just the committee, including Deputy Mayor and Councillor Coburn.
Mm-hmm. So I think when we originally talked about this notion, it was to get away from sending, you know, media articles or technical documents or other tools through email, that we could just simply share them in this particular team within Teams. So for me, I see it as valuable that way. That way for me, maybe it's just my hang up, but when I see a lot of emails in my inbox, it makes me have a rash. So I would rather know that if I want to look for information that's being posted specific to climate action, there's a place where I can go and dedicate some time just to do that, and it's going to be there. If it's time sensitive, of course, you wouldn't put it there. And if you do turn on your notifications, you can get those noises or pop-ups coming up when you're you'll have to be in Teams, I would imagine. Would you, Brittany, to get those notifications?
So you do have to have, you don't have to have, but it makes life a lot easier if you have the application installed on your desktop. So that would be my recommendation. If you're still accessing the program through the internet, you can still access the Teams site. It just will make your life a lot easier if you download the app. And Councillor Coburn, I'm wondering if it's beneficial to the committee if you'd like me to take 5 minutes to run through the Teams site and point out what can be used for what purpose.
I mean, sure. I think we've got time. Is that something you can do with a share screen? Yeah. Or okay, perfect. Is that something committee members have time for and are interested in at this point? Yeah, sounds like that's a go. Thanks, Brittany.
Okay, so bear with me. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so when I open my Teams application, so I am working off of the desktop application, and Councillor Coburn, I would ask when I share my screen, I don't have the capacity to see you, so please stop me if there's any hands raising or any questions. So what I mentioned is the site has been set up as a team. So I'll select my Teams icon on the left-hand side, and you'll note that you can now see a Climate Action Committee site. Within the site, there are different things that you can use to forward or advance the discussions that we have at committee meetings. So I posted the first discussion under the general site just to introduce everyone to the team and the benefits of the tool. So this is a current conversation that's ongoing, and you can see that Councillor Coburn has taken part as well as Member Schneider. Now, within this team, you have the ability to upload certain announcements or use it as a planning tool. So within this planning tool, there's different, I guess, sub-tools, being planning notes, project plans, milestones. All of these things you can use to better define your work plan or even integrate your work plan into this tool should you wish to. Now, Councillor Coburn, you touched upon uploading different informational resources. There is a resource tool in which this committee can store different pieces of information or media conversations, etc. So all of these different tools are beneficial to the committee should we use them in the way that they were designed to. So I simply wanted to go over what the Teams channel consists of and how you may use it in a beneficial manner. As I say, I think giving you this quick update will simply just introduce you to the tool. Should you wish to have a more detailed breakdown of what each site can do and how you should be using it, then I'm happy to put that together for the committee.
How are folks feeling about that? And thanks, Brittany. You know, I think it's pretty user friendly as long as you know where to go on that left-hand column to select the right team. I don't want to ask you to type out a detailed list of instructions with all of your other duties if our folks on this committee feel like they can find their way around that. I do agree, though, having the app on your computer is helpful, especially in terms of getting notifications. Otherwise, you have to make a point of going into the Teams link and then checking to see what's there. Was that helpful? Do people feel like they can play with it themselves, or are we looking for some detailed instructions that are written out? Danuta?
No, I mean, it feels stupid. I'm really happy, though, that you did that, Brittany, because I can now understand how useful it could be. and I would use it. When I downloaded the Windows app for the Microsoft Teams, it said to click the installer once it was downloaded. I couldn't find any installation button or whatever to click on anywhere. So it's sitting there on my downloads and I can't install it. So I think that's my own problem. That's all. So, I mean, at the moment, I'm still accessing it through the link you sent in an email about a month ago. I don't understand why I'm having such difficulty. That's all. So when I can find it, I'll be happy to use it.
Yeah. Not sure why that installation feature isn't showing up for you. And I see John has just asked Brittany if you can put the link in that you've put that in the general chat, John. So that won't. I don't think that's going to show up in our Teams. Our Teams. Brittany's just gone ahead and done that. No sooner said than done. Thank you. So that link is now there. Go ahead, Brittany.
Our lovely and always helpful Deputy Clerk Carly has offered her assistance to connect with committee members to ensure that they can have the app successfully installed or give a how-to. So if you're having difficulty, just connect with Carly and she can assist you. Thank you, Carly.
Thanks, Carly. Super. Okay, Danuta, your hand is up. Is that from before? And Bob, I think, did I see your hand up as well?
Well, I wasn't sure. I just, just make it as simple as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a great offer from Carly to help individuals as needed. For sure. Okay. Thank you for that. I think that's it for new business. There was nothing else there, correct? No notices of motion, no closed session. The date of our next regular meeting is June 16th. I will be in Newfoundland, so I will not be able to attend that next meeting, but I urge you to go ahead in my absence. I feel like we've got several action items that will come from this meeting, so it should be a good, purposeful agenda. Anne, may I ask you to chair that meeting in my absence? Thank you. That date, I'm assuming, is going to work for folks. If not, please send on your regrets. And I will ask for someone to move that we adjourn the meeting today. 7 minutes to spare. Thank you, Danuta. All in favor? And that passes. Thank you, folks. And thank you very much to staff for helping keep us on track.